Mr. Calhoun, can you hear me?
Yeah. How are you?
I'm good.
All right, so I should ask this one. And Mr. Grabowski. Oh, back. Yeah, Mr. Grabowski is about to come back in shortly, but I think we should just go ahead and get started. You're good. All right. This thing.
Budget. Presentation.
Good day. Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. You want to just hop on? Do you need a computer? Huh?
I've seen you too. Maggie, I've seen you. That's funny. Good to see you, sir.
I go ahead and get started and call this meeting for the what's May 9th, 2024 Audit and Finance meeting. Committee meeting. We're going to go ahead and call it to order. We have a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
I have a second.
I
Second.
second with the following changes.
All right.
Mr. Calhoun, I believe we need to add an item after we come out of executive session for a possible action.
That is absolutely true. Yes, we do need to do that. So we add that to 8A, possible action. So for clarification, we are looking to adopt the agenda with one added action item to 8A for the executive session action. Do we have any objections? So we have a motion for let's go to call for another motion for the adoption of the agenda with the amended change.
So moved.
Do we have a second? We have a
Second.
motion, second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. We will move forward to the approval of the minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All right, thank you. As I've mentioned in the room, we'll be moving through this agenda pretty expeditiously. There's a weather pattern coming down. I want everybody to be safe, so we will be as thorough as possible, also as quick as possible. So we're going to go ahead and move forward to action 2A, Citizens Oversight Steering Committee Phase 5 sales tax program. Now will be Mr. Barrow.
Yes, sir. I can take that one. So this is a nomination for the Citizens Oversight Steering Committee, Phase 5, from the mayor of North Charleston. Just real quick, each mayor of the three larger towns, as well as the Chamber of Commerce and Charleston County Council Chair, can provide up to 3 nominations. One of the current members of the committee is retiring this summer, and Mayor Burgess has requested a new member be added to the committee.
All right. So we will start with our questions. Ms. Online, Ms. Robertson,
I have no questions.
Mr. Duke,
I have no questions.
Mr. Hallises.
No questions.
No questions.
No questions.
I have no questions. Thank you.
So
Oh,
I am online.
all right. I'll see you there. Do you have any questions, Ms. Stamp?
Just, do we have names of the potential, or how does that work? For the replacement, have the names been submitted already?
Yes, it's Mayor Burgess nominated Dr. Kathy Love. It's on the board docs to succeed.
I didn't I didn't see an attach.
Mhm.
I didn't see
Dr.
any
Kathy Love.
attachments to this one. It was referenced, but
Yeah, I apologize. It is Dr. Kathy Love, and there are no membership criteria. So there's no resume required. There's no background requirement for this nomination.
okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you. We will now move forward to 2B, which will be the 2023-2028 capital program phase 5.
Thank you, Mr. Calhoun. Within the Phase 5 program, there were 3 projects that was used for under long-term debt, which is AC Cochran, Deer Park, and Morningside. Those 3 projects have been designed, and that design is complete. We had $4 million allocated for the design for all 3 together. We have spent $2.5 million of the $4 million, leaving us with a 1.5, roughly speaking, $1 million balance. We would like to take that balance from design and move it over into the construction phase. All three projects are currently under the construction phase as we speak. And that's what this particular reallocation is associated with. Pending any questions.
Ms. Roberson,
I have no questions.
Mr. Duke. All right, Mr. Hallis,
No questions.
Ms. Stamp.
No questions.
Just a quick question.
No questions.
Is this being moved over essentially as a way to just preserve the dollars for contingency purpose? We'll have a little more contingency, or do we actually also have increased construction costs on those 3 projects?
We're going to move it over for contingency. We haven't had anything that would jeopardize there being a concern with costs at this time with these projects.
Got it. I'm still in favor of this. Thanks.
Rossi.
No questions.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Shaw. We will now move forward to 2C, the 2017-2022 capital program. Mr. Hamer.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Calhoun, members of the committee. The purpose of this item is to pass a resolution or to reallocate money from the Phase 4 program, not the current program, but the Phase 4 program for maintenance for a specific project that I've recommended that we should accelerate in our program. If you look on the briefing sheet there, we have a reallocation request of $1.5 million. It's for new components for an HVAC system at Whitesides Elementary School. I've recommended again to leadership that we accelerate executing that project. And in order to do that, we found savings in our Phase 4 program with the items that are above that item to execute that. So again, in summary, $1.5 million reallocation for HVAC repairs or to replace HVAC units at Whiteside Elementary School, all paid for with savings in our Phase 4 program. Standing by for your questions.
All right. Let's go for same order. Ms. Roberson.
So, Mr. Hamer, you said this was an emergency, and that's why you selected this particular project?
Well, I wouldn't say it's emergency. We have had over the last several months some problems with consistency with that particular component of the HVAC system. It's not the entire HVAC system, just some components. It would normally not be reallocated, or it would normally not be replaced until several years in the out years. And so I wanted to move that up. So I wouldn't classify it as an emergency, but something I want to get done quicker than waiting for it to be in the actual sales tax program.
Because your note said that it would have been in the 6-year plan. So
Okay.
you're moving up from the 6-year plan to now,
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
but it's not an emergency.
Well, again, I wouldn't use the term emergency. I would classify it gives us the ability to get ahead of some ongoing maintenance challenges that we've had. Like I've said, the units are working, the system is working fine. It's my opinion that sometime over the next several years, it's going to require recapitalization. I think doing it now, since we have the ability with the savings in the Phase 4 program, I think it's prudent to use that to execute that now.
And one final question. How do we speak to other projects that's in a 6-year plan that's not being moved up if it's not an emergency?
Well, certainly I look at those on a case-by-case basis. There are other things that we're doing with funding. As a matter of fact, that there is another resolution that'll be briefed here in a few minutes that we're finding some fixed cost of ownership funds to address those. So there are other funding mechanisms that we're using to address things that we want to pull up. And again, as we encounter some that we feel that need to be done sooner than later, then we look within our program to see if there are other ways to fund it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Duke,
No questions.
Mr. Hallis,
No questions.
Ms. Stamp,
No questions.
No questions.
just one question. Where was it inside of the queue of the 6-year program? Was it like at the top of the 6, or this is just one that you pulled out?
Well, I wouldn't say that it was inside of a particular queue. It was just identified for that year for execution. So it had no priority relative to the other programs that we're doing, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Let's move forward to 2D, fixed cost of ownership, budget reallocation. Got you. Can't believe so.
This is a resolution, or this item is requesting a reallocation of funding for fixed costs of operations or ownership for additional work on HVAC units throughout the Charleston County School District. And this speaks a little bit to the question that I was asked before. The previous resolution specifically had phase 4 savings for a specific recapitalization of a component for HVAC at Whiteside. This has several schools that aren't recapitalizations, but these are critical repairs that we wanted to achieve again sooner than we would replace the entire system. So this reallocation of $455,000, I have a party of schools that, again, I've seen that waiting for the recapitalization probably would have maybe a negative effect. And so I wanted to execute work on those sooner than later.
All right, Ms. Roberson.
Due to the weather, I saved my questions.
Okay. Mr. Duke,
No questions.
Mr. Hallis.
No questions.
I'm trying to figure out the source of these fundings.
This is a FCO fund. So if you see there were some savings throughout the FCO program for FY24. So we were able to find savings there, both with some program contingency and some savings within the IT department that I could put towards these HVAC repairs.
And it looks like you're dropping the contingency down to just 8,000. So you're taking 400,000 out of contingency.
This is the end of the year, sir. So this money, we can't expend it beyond this summer essentially. And I'll defer to Ms. Costello on that one, but we're trying to execute every last penny of FY24 at this point.
Yes, that's correct. And the program contingency is where our interest earned is accumulated,
Right.
and those funds need to be spent. Exactly. Thank you.
No further questions?
Right. And what you have under the public comment, these are all the schools that will be getting updated.
Specific, sir.
What the schools that we have for Chicora, Dunston, Jeannie Moore, Laurel Hill, Sanders
Yes.
Spot, those
Yes,
are all
sir.
the schools
Yes,
that
sir.
are getting
Exactly.
more.
Those are the ones we've identified.
Okay, I have no further questions.
Just one other question. So there's no further need on the information and technology this year that we can squeeze in for that like last 8? It just seems odd that, you know, everything
honestly-
we've been talking about to see that actually dropped down.
And any thoughts on the last 8,000, Ms. Costello?
We are retaining that $8,000 in case there's an emergency before everyone
Okay.
has closed out of their projects. I would love to zero that out, but I'm too conservative. And so that was really the amount we left in there.
That's two
Just write it up.
whiteboards and a computer. Maybe. Thank you.
Ms. Roberts, you don't want to ask any?
No, but it's good to know that that 8 million is there. I'll send an email.
All right, well,
8,000.
8,000.
8,000.
Yeah.
I wish it was 8,000. All right, thank you. And we will now move forward to 2E, the Laura Brown Fund.
Thank you, Mr. Calhoun. I'd like to present for the committee. You have an attachment, and the attachment shows the proposed distribution of $75,000 in support of Laura Brown Fund use for students who have won first place in a local or state competition and are participating at the next level of competition.
Okay, that's it.
Yes, sir.
All right, Robertson.
I have no question, but Ms. Denny, thank you. This was something that was important to us to increase the dollar value so that we would not have to not give students what they requested. So this is a move in the right direction, and thank you for following up on the board's requests.
Yes, ma'am. It was a team effort.
Thank you.
Mr. Duke.
And the only question I have is I didn't see the attachment on there. I only saw the line item.
I didn't have it either.
It's an executive content. When there's an executive content, if they're not logged in, they can't see it.
Yes, sir.
No, I actually think that came as a separate in an email from Miss Tanisha.
Right, that went out to all.
I didn't see.
Yeah, the only
I
email
didn't
I
see that.
for all the ones when I requested for the committee vacancy info.
Yes.
Yeah, we didn't see it either.
It'll be distributed among 6 schools.
Mhm.
Those schools are Wando, Charleston County School of the Arts, Academic Magnet, I'm so sorry, 5 schools, Orange Grove, Charleston Charter, and Palmetto Scholars Academy.
Stephen and Velma, look for an email dated May 6th titled Laura Brown Fund Request Distribution.
No, I didn't get that one. I mean, it's okay.
Okay.
I don't get it. We don't get those. The non-board members don't have the same access to that. So those distributions don't.
Cool.
No, sorry, I'm just looking at an email from Tanisha Talbot dated May 6th, and it's to everyone on the committee.
Going. Let's see.
Yeah, you can keep going. I'll look, but I don't have a May 6th from.
Okay.
Yeah, the May 6th
Tanisha.
I have from her. Let me just open up the Google Drive. Just has all the committee.
Might I ask some clarity from those non-trustees on the Audit Finance Committee? So you do not have access to executive content in board docs?
No.
Okay,
No.
with Ms. Tanisha to figure out exactly, I think this is the second time this might have happened, so we want to ensure it doesn't happen in the future. I'll make note of that and we'll work on it. So we apologize for any oversight. You good, you good. So Ms. Denny, could you clarify the amount of the requested funds and one more time, the charter, the schools that applied for funding?
Yes, so the total amount of the request was $79,971.21. We divided the $75,000 GOF line item evenly across the percent of the request. So we took the 79,000, applied the percent of the dollar request, and then divided accordingly amongst the 75,000. Yes, sir.
All right. Any questions, Mr. Duke?
No, I'm good.
Mr. Hallis?
I'm fine, thank you.
Ms. Stamp?
I'm good, thank you.
Mr. Grabowski?
It always, I'm always worried about how this evaluation and the promotion of this potential, funding source is done to all schools so that all schools know and push students to participate in programs. Because Wando, Academic Magnet, Performing Arts, all right, Orange Grove. But it just seems like, and I don't know, we only see this at the end when the money's being, dished out, but it just seems like, how much of this is being promoted to this? I mean, do the schools know this to where the students are pushing for it?
They do. So last year, the board stated that concern. And so we increased the number of times that we placed the information in the principal's packet so that we could make sure that all principals were aware. Additionally, we've shared the information with our CTE colleagues. It's generally speaking the subject area, the academic side where we get these requests from for those competitions in the CTE area, career and technology education. And so they're also aware, they're constantly advocating with their schools. So I do feel that there was an improvement this year.
And could you go over the vetting process? Because it seems like they let you know and it's coming to you. The Department of Ed is somehow involved, or is it not involved? It's just internally done by the district.
It's internally done by the district. This is a GOF line item for CCSD. And so the vetting process, we've got a packet that each school submits, and you should have access to it. They list the students, they list the chaperones. There's also confirmation of their first place win, airline, hotel, anything else. The packets can be upwards of 20, 25 pages if there's enough information needed.
But I'm just trying to think of the criteria that maybe would open it up to more schools and more students applying, trying to get it.
Right.
It's just food for thought.
Yes, sir.
No more.
So is it that the students have already won some type of competition and they're going to another level? Is that what this is? Is that what this is about?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I actually had the same concern, but as Mr. Grabowski, but yeah, thank you for working to get it higher, and hopefully we can get more students, more schools to apply for next year. So I think we will move forward to 2F, to Mr. Prentice.
Good afternoon. So I have the 250,000 and over list for review this afternoon. You'll notice this month we have a new format of that list after going through several meetings to review areas where we could improve the format and the presentation of all the information and consideration of comments from the board, the disparity study, and other metrics that we wanted to highlight. So the report is now split into two sections. The first page has 3 charts that depict the breakdown of funding sources for procurements over 250,000 for the month, the procurement method that's employed, as well as the department where the funds are being requested from. And then the chart on the first page depicts all new competitive procurement and contracts that went through our local process to secure a vendor for each particular budgeted item. The second page is exemptions, state contracts, and other existing things that were in place that didn't require any further vetting this month. So I wanted to kind of split those off because in prior reports, they were commingled together just so that you could focus on the specifics of the ones that we went through a new competitive process for. So on the first page, I'll detail those items. You'll see the Drayton Hall Elementary door and hardware replacement. You'll see that that was not a change order, the number of days that it was open and the number of bids that were received. and the resulting solicitation number that used as the justification. The next one is Thomas Carrier Middle ceiling replacement. Again, this was a change order, and that original solicitation was open 21 days and received 2 different bids. Door and hardware at Carrier as well. That was a change order to existing project, and you'll see the number of days it was open, the amounts. The School of the Arts Phase 2 roof restoration project. This was an add-on to a previously bid contract for the cafeteria and gym roofs that were previously completed to be able to complete those projects within the budget that was established. And then the St. James Santee cabinet replacement and the Bridgeview door and hardware replacement. So all of these have been reviewed by the appropriate parties. And in the cases of these, I believe all of these were on standard language AIA contracts. So there wasn't any level of legal review of contract language that resulted from those particular solicitations. Are some of our non-standard services that are bid outside of construction and facilities will use more of a vendor contract or a contract that we negotiate the language directly outside of the AIA format, and we'll depict those if they ever come up in the future. And then on the next page, we have the exemption for frontline education, for some purchases of vehicles, and for Presentation Systems South that were all through different procurement methods that didn't require direct advertisement. None of those were change orders. And also included there, I have the links to the Consolidated Procurement Code, the disparity study, our standard vendor application that's on the website, and our vendor guide. And then I've redlined a placeholder for the future inclusion of our updated procurement procedures manual and the P-card manual when those documents are available and posted on the website. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Also, you'll notice in the recommended motion for this, we're seeking an adjustment to how this report is handled. The 2022 board directive that required this to be approved does have some implications to the timing of the procurement process, and we would love to see this report continue to be shared for transparency purposes, but ultimately be an information-only report so that these procurements could advance forward much further and, in advance of the meeting and the approval that are required as they are now.
All right. Let's stay in the same order, Ms. Roberson.
Okay, Mr. Prentice, I have one question. Line item 4, the School of the Arts Phase 2 roof restoration. It's noted as a change order. Originally, this was the cafeteria and gym contract, but then they put a change order in to do the roof.
Yes, I'm going to let Mr. Hamer come up and answer the specifics of that particular question, just it's related to the facility.
Yes, ma'am. A little bit of a complex issue there. So what we were just pointing out in here is that there were actually 2 phases to the work. One phase was the cafeteria and the gym, and then a second phase for some other portions of the building. We did a solicitation for that second contract, which is a separate contract. When we got bids in, the bids were higher than the budget that we had. So we executed a portion of the contract that we had money for. We reallocated more money to this contract and then did a change order for the rest of the work that was in that solicitation.
Okay, that's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the fact that we pointed out that we did a gym and cafeteria maybe is a little confusing. What we were just trying to point out is that the entirety of the building needed roof repair. We did it in 2 phases. One was a separate contract, gym and cafeteria, that was done. We have another contract that needed a change order because we had to add more money to it to execute the entirety of that second phase.
So,
Okay.
so are you actually going out for competitive bids on change orders? I mean, I may not quite understand the process for this, but
yes, ma'am, that competitive.
Where you have competitive bids, but would you have competitive bids against a change order? Or would the change order just be against the contract that you currently have?
That's correct. So for that second phase, we did, as Mr. Prentice has pointed out, use the procurement processes that was appropriate for that. We had a contract that needed to be changed because we only executed a portion of it, the portion that was in the budget. Once we allocated once we reallocated the full amount of it, it required a change order to execute the full amount of that solicitation.
It probably be a little clearer if those were separated. Because it sounds like they're different contracts. So it might be have them listed separately so that you could show exactly what against. Because here it may appear that you're doing competitive bids for change orders against contracts.
Yes, ma'am. I take your point on it. And again, it makes me a little confused. You were breaking up a little bit, but I think I got your point in there. It did make it a little confusing from the fact that we were talking about there was an earlier phase there. What we were just trying to do was make the point that the entirety of the work included two separate phases. The second phase required a modification to the contract.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Mr.
Yeah, we had the unit quantities. It was all competitively bid, so it's just using the unit quantities in that base bid and then adding scope on for the entirety of the rest of the building.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Ms. Robertson, anything else?
No, that's it.
Mr. Duke,
No, I'm good, thank you.
Mr. Hallison,
No comments.
Ms. Stamp,
I do appreciate the change in the format and the links that are added. Do you have any idea or have a target date for completion of the procedure manual for the P card and the procurement process?
There's some of that.
she's asking about the dates of the completion for the two manuals that you redlined out. But,
Okay. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. It was breaking up a little bit. So Mr. Calhoun had to clarify the question for me. So we have those documents in draft form. And I would like to be able to bring those to the board for review this summer. They're not, and I'll have to look at the way that they were previously approved. I think one of them is a staff level manual that just takes the code and translates it into more of an FAQ and best practice manual for how things are administered, and might not require any level of approval, but we'll certainly share it. I just wanted it to be out there as a resource in the future since it was applicable to the code and references the code in specific sections where those policies and procedures are outlined.
Okay, thank you.
all right. Questions? And Ms. Robertson already got to my question about number 4. Oh, cool. I'm good.
Mr. Calhoun, before we move on, I think there's a part 2 to Mr. Prentice's report. Having this as information only, I think the committee needs to discuss that.
That's where I was just about to get to. Yeah, so as you see within the recommended motion, would be moving this from an action item to an information item. As you know, we do not go through, from our charter, we do not go through each one and try to pull anything out. We are here for
Oversight.
That's the word I'm looking for, oversight. As opposed to approving this. They handle the money, they do the budget, they push everything through. However, we evaluate off of what that is. And, you know, like I said, we stay here for the oversight. So what Mr. Prentice was looking, tell me if I'm wrong, was looking to do is to make this an information item to where it's presented to us, as in some of our other information items that we have, like the budget and the ESER updates and reports and financial reports, and we can question them from off of that. So this will require us removing the March 2022 directive. That will end up having to go to a board for further approval. So I think we should go ahead and have that conversation. And let's actually begin with Mr. Grabowski first.
No, I think we've discussed this for many months in trying to get to that stage after looking at it, since we are not actively involved. And the biggest fear is we don't look at the contracts or everything. We have to rely on staff. It's really more of looking at it as Mr. Calhoun said, as it's just as oversight to make sure that the processes are being there, and that if any questions are raised, that at least staff is aware that there may be some questions, like the change order issue. That does look kind of complicated, and I think it's good that the public has an opportunity to hear this. So it is good to have the information, but as to taking up any more time at Cal or the board, I just think no. I think this is the phase.
Yeah, I'll chime in. I agree. I think having the visibility is a positive, but having this body and the board be an approval in the process for funds that we've gotten approval for the budget, we're in a sense creating a roadblock for them to do their job. And probably those roadblocks create inefficiency that probably cost us more money in the long run than any benefit we might get from trying to pre-approve these things.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Robertson.
After sitting on this board for 17 months, I'm finally satisfied with the 250K report. And this is exactly what I was asking for. And so I'm 100% in favor of this being an informational item.
We're so glad to hear you say that, Ms. Roberson. Hip hip hooray. We really worked hard, and I want to thank Mr. Broe and Mr. Prentice and other chief leaders for their collaboration around it.
Mr. Duke.
Yeah, I agree. I see no reason why, it's an action item. So I'm fine with it going to information, and I like the new format. This is a lot easier to read than the old spreadsheet version.
All right. Mr. Hallis.
Nothing to add that hasn't already been said.
Ms. Stamp.
So I have no problem moving information as information only. However, I do think that as a committee, we should not lose sight of our responsibility for oversight. So we need to, because the procurement area is a very sensitive area. And so we need to probably look at how we're going to ensure that we are providing the appropriate oversight of this process. So I think for us, it means that we need to be a little bit more in the process.
I think we just lost her. But I completely agree with what you were saying.
Thank you.
I completely agree with what everyone said, and especially what Ms. Stamp was saying. We do move this over from approval to the information. We have to stay on top of it. With the way that this new report is reading, it makes it a lot easier for us to go through and see the things that we need, but then also having the relevant links on there as well to where we can here we go. To where we can corroborate everything. So I'm in favor of it. The process a lot easier on Mr. Prentice and his team. So yeah, I'm completely in favor of it as well.
So do we need to change the language from contemplate to,
I would believe so.
I would think
but
so
then,
too.
Then we also need to make sure the board members understand why we're making move for that March 2022 directive to be taken off. And I believe when we get to board, we should make this two separate. We should split
Two separate motions. Yeah, that's.
Yeah. All right. So thank you all.
I also think we should revisit, Mr. Calhoun, I also think we should revisit that disparity study, because apparently it was that disparity study that resulted in the format that was being used. So you want to make sure that what was that study, move that to an information only will not, we're not doing anything that is in line with that, the recommendations of that study. Because from my understanding, that's why this whole process was developed.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, let me just piggyback on what Ms. Stamp said. Mr. Prentice and I have, we've had a brief conversation about the disparity studies. There are other things that's also in that disparity studies that I think this committee should put eyes on. Maybe not now, but once he gets settled and has an opportunity to go through the entire study, there are other things that should be brought to this committee's attention that's listed in that study.
Absolutely. I think we can, just knock one thing off at a time. So we got this 250 report. We're moving through. We can focus on something else next month. All right. Thank you, Ms. Robertson. So let's go ahead and move forward to public comments. I don't see anything with us today. And do we receive any emails? All right, so we have no public comments in today. So we will now move forward to our action items. So we'll vote on the first one, which would now be 4A, the Citizens Oversight Steering Committee content. So this will be a motion to approve a replacement COSC member.
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion, second. Any further comments? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye. And this time I saw your comment as well, so we can hear you for now, and Mr. Duke as well. So
recording in progress.
guess that storm is coming through now. All right, we will now move to 4B, the 2023 Capital Program Phase 5. This will be a motion to approve the reallocation of funds as shown on the attached resolution.
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Ayes have it. We will now move to 4C, the 2017-2022 Capital Program Sales Tax. Excuse me. Excuse me. Motion to approve the reallocation of funds shown on the attached resolution. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. The ayes have it. Let me get some water. Ms. Robertson, can you move forward? I need to go get some water.
Okay, we are item
C.
B,
4D.
4B, the 2023-28 capital programs, long-term debt budget reallocation. Is that where we are?
We're on the fixed cost of ownership.
So D.
Yeah, 4D.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the reallocation of funds as shown on the attached resolution?
So moved.
Second.
Is there a second? It's been properly moved and second. Ready for the vote? All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. 4E, 2024 Laura Brown Fund Request Distribution. Is there a motion to approve the distribution of the Laura Brown Special Board funds as submitted?
So moved.
So moved.
Is there a second? It's been properly moved and second. Ready for the vote? All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. 4F, purchases and contracts greater than 250. Is there a motion to approve the list of purchases and contracts greater than 250 through April 29th, 2024?
So moved.
So moved.
Is there a second? Are you ready for questions? Any questions?
Yeah, one quick thing. Thank you, Ms. Robertson. So are we splitting this now? Perfect. So we will take the motion we will take the recommendation for the board director, March 2022 board directive on the next part of it.
So I think the way Ms. Robertson said it was the correct motion.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, you can take it over.
All right, so we have a motion to approve the list of the purchases and contracts greater than 250 through April 29th, 2024.
So moved.
We have a second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 The ayes have it. going to now take on the, put forward a recommendation to remove the March. Board approval of this list and make it a monthly transparency report in order to streamline the procurement process. We have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Let's move to our information. The monthly financial report. I'll go to Mr. Prentice.
All right, so we have the financial report for you ending March 31st, 2024. Really start to see the end of the fiscal year come into focus in this last quarter. So I'll start out with revenues. For local sources, inclusive of all property tax collections, we're estimating to end the year at $476 million, which is a positive variance over the budget of just over $41 million. We've seen an increase in those projections of about $7.7 million over the past month as we've received some more clarity on the fee in lieu of taxes and property tax collections, net of the assessments deducted for tax increment financing districts. So we believe that this is likely where we're to end the year in terms of property tax revenues, and have clarified that picture for fiscal 25 revenue forecast as well. No changes to intergovernmental, and a small adjustment to state revenues based on allocations on the state's dashboard. And so all of those revenues that we've posted year to date tie exactly to the State Department of Education's dashboard for the revenues that we receive per the state's budget. Otherwise, everything remains the same. So all told, we're projecting to end the fiscal year $42.5 million over budget, with the majority of that coming from local sources. On the expenditure side, we have salaries, the decrease or the lapsed salaries that we're projecting at the end of the year savings has increased to $11.4 million, as benefits have also increased to savings of $3.4 million. So that helps us at the end of the year in terms of the savings that we're projecting on the expenditure side. We've held the line steady on purchase services, the variance being the ESSER purchases that we've discussed over the last several months that were ineligible for ESSER funds that had to be moved over to the GOF. So those are reflected there accordingly under purchase services. And then just some minor variances in capital outlay and other objects. Of course, we've talked about before as well that transfers include the payments to charter schools based on the prior year's actual budget, and those adjustments based on the payments that were made. We still, of course, don't reflect the need to use any fund balance. So that fund balance, the $14.4 million that was budgeted to balance the fiscal 24 budget, is not anticipated to be needed. I do have one point that I'd like to make on this report, and I'm working on some adjustments to the report going into fiscal 25. The way that this is presented with the use of fund balance, it does make the bottom line number in terms of what the actual savings are look a little bit different than I would like for it to. And based on generally accepted accounting principles and governmental accounting standards board, fund balance is really a revenue source. It's not an expenditure. And so I'm looking at making some adjustments to the report to put the fund balance up as a revenue line item. So in the event that we use the fund balance, we'll show the amount that we've used as a revenue received, so to speak. And then if there's nothing there, then we would reflect it as unused and it would fall back down to fund balance, but it'll prevent that deduction that then happens below the total projected surplus deficit happening again to get to your true year-end fund balance. It'll be a cleaner mathematical calculation for transparency purposes. So in the new year, just look for that line to change a little bit. As I was looking through the WSF financial report that we'll do and trying to make sure that we streamline the way that these reports work, and some questions that we received, I thought that was something that we could change just to make it a little bit more simplistic to read. But otherwise, you'll notice as we get into the budget presentation today that our projected use of fund balance in the fiscal 25 budget lines up almost exactly to the projected positive variance in the fiscal 24 budget, which was the strategy for balancing.
Thank you. Let's open it up for questions. Ms. Roberson.
I have no question, but I completely agree with you and appreciate the cleaning up of the report and the swapping of that line item. So thank you for recognizing that.
All right, Mr. Duke.
I have no questions.
Mr. Hollis,
No questions.
Ms. Stamp,
No questions. And I did what Robeson said. I do appreciate moving that fund balance line to the revenue section. Get it clear.
No additional questions?
I have, and I'm just looking at your notes and realizing that the local source of revenue is about 65% of what we're receiving, as you will later clearly show. But your notes obviously break down some of the discrepancies in the revenue. And once it's county park revenue, without understanding exactly what that means, but to have a 28% increase, is that like a one-time item? And how much really is that of the revenue? I mean, why are we getting that?
So you're going to bring the county government side of me out a little bit here. But
thank God.
the multi-county park is one of the biggest misnomers in the property tax world in South Carolina, because you would think that it has to do with an actual park or an industrial park, and it doesn't. What the state law allows is for an economic development project to be implemented with a partner county. So I don't know what Charleston's partner county is, but in the case of Dorchester, Orangeburg was the partner county. So every time a fee in lieu of tax agreement would be executed, there was a partner county agreement, and the partner county would get 1% of the fee in lieu of tax revenue derived from the collections of the fixed millage and the assessment ratio reduction that the fee in lieu of tax agreement allowed. And so that in effect became the creation of a multi-county park, even though the property didn't cross county lines. It didn't exist in two counties. It was just one location in one of those counties. It's a nuance in the law that allows for economic development projects to take advantage of this interesting revenue sharing component. So the reason for the increase is as these fee in lieu of tax agreements are executed over time and new construction happens on those properties, and that certificate of occupancy is issued whenever those projects are completed, we can see a substantial increase in revenue in one particular year from the existence of those buildings. The other thing that can happen is a lot of these properties are manufacturing plants, and they have a lot of machinery and equipment that is personal property. And so those things will life cycle. Like a server is good for about 3 years, and it's depreciated over 3 years. And so when they submit their property tax statements to the Department of Revenue and certify what their values are on their equipment, it can cause a major increase if they've replaced all their servers in 1 year. So all of a sudden their taxes go up, and then the next year they go down. And then, Google replaces all the servers at the Berkeley plant 1 year for $2 billion, and they go up again. So we get those reports from the county and can analyze what those revenues will be, but there's a lot of anomaly to it. So it's a weird phenomenon.
But how much are we talking at 28%? I mean, that's quite an increase. Are we talking like $1,000? Or we
No. So in this case, and I don't know if Ms. Carter's on. I left her to stay at the office to work on wrapping up the budget. I want to say the variance this year was about $4 to $5 million, because typically our budget for fee in lieu of tax is around 12 to 13 million, and we were seeing that come in at 18 to 19 million at year end before the TIF credits had posted. So it was a substantial increase.
And the likelihood of this being sustained at this amount?
So that depreciation, so you likely would see a small decrease over the next couple of years, depending on the line item, the line of depreciation that the equipment's on. But then again, could see some major increases happen as new equipment is placed into service. So one thing that I had a staff do this year to better track that is they reached out to the Charleston County Economic Development Office and got the schedules from the new fee in lieu of tax agreements that have all those certifications with the personal property on it. So we can see if the equipment that they placed in service is going to depreciate over 10 years or 3 years, because that makes a big difference in terms of how quickly those values fall off and when those values get refreshed.
And then there are these overages in the shared services, particularly to the addition of the substitute services needed to vacant positions. I mean, is this an ongoing issue, or is this something that we're hoping to address as we get closer to approving this wonderful budget?
So the variances that you're seeing here, we've addressed those items in the fiscal 25 base budget. So we have an increase included for substitutes. We have an increase for the 10-day student counts and the 90-day student counts and all of those things where adjustments this year resulted in negative variances. So I think that you'll see that next year's budget will be more true to form for the experience that we have.
Excellent. And then I was reading about this denied this ESSER funding that we're bringing into the GOF because of the denial by the federal government, over the issuance of non-compete clauses.
So I've spent a lot of time on this in the last couple of months. The procurement study that was done, I guess maybe a year or so ago, brought some of these issues to light, as did the State Department of Education. And essentially what happened is services were contracted before the non-compete form was approved by the State Department. And when the State Department noticed the misalignment of the date of execution of the contract or the pre-issuance of a purchase order, out of alignment with when the non-compete form was submitted, they denied the use of ESSER funds for those procurements. And in other circumstances, and this was brought out by the procurement audit, our local procurement code exempts certain educational services over $10,000 from going through a competitive process. And so all of these ESSER transactions were also exempted, even though the Code of Federal Regulations and the American Rescue Plan ESSER guidance does not allow for those exemptions. And so by default, they were denied. So that was a big adjustment that had to happen. Journal entries had to be posted, and we're still paying invoices that were part of a master contract that fell into that category. But that's our estimate for the variance that'll happen as a result of that.
I'm sorry, what was that dollar amount? I'm sorry, Mr. Kowalski. What was that dollar amount that we had to pay into GOF because of those denials?
The estimate was $2.67 million.
Okay.
And I will say, just to try to soften this circumstance a little bit, where we now have ESSER savings because we weren't able to spend the ESSER dollars on those purchases, we're looking in the FY25 budget to spend those ESSER dollars to offset salaries that are currently eligible under the ESSER plan so that we still spend every last dollar of ESSER funding that we received. And the net effect would be neutral essentially to the budget between the transition of the fiscal years.
Yes, Ms. Roberson, you'll understand that specifically given the exchange you and I had this morning. So we're trying to make sure we don't leave any dollars on the table.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
And the other interesting thing in the note dealt with the December 2023 notice, or I guess acknowledgement of the weighted student formula. I mean, I'm trying to understand how that happened. And then are we going into this budget making sure that that doesn't happen?
And what note are you referencing?
The note 3E
3D
or 3D.
Okay. Yes. So the charter school payments is what you're talking about there?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So I guess at last year's budget, the budget was set based on year-end revenues at the early part of the budget process. And those year-end revenues obviously increased substantially towards the end of the fiscal year. And so the budgets that were established didn't line up exactly with the payments that had to be made based on the year-end budget. So actually, we just sent the first draft charter school payment estimates out to the charter schools last week, but we used our projected year-end, we're using these numbers from the March month-end report, and we've actually trued up the charter school payment numbers in the first reading of the budget that you'll see in the presentation we'll share this afternoon. So the original number that I think you saw back in January was around $6 million increase in charter school payments. And throughout our reconciliation of that number's gone up to about 8.3 million in total based on the projected year-end revenue. And that's all included in the balanced budget. So it's just projecting those year-end revenues a little closer to the reality of where they land, since that ultimately drives what that number is. We just got the 135-day counts from the State Department, which is the population numbers that are used, or the enrollment numbers that are used, and the weighted pupil unit calculation as well. So all those numbers are. Thank you.
Thank you. I will save my questions for the next budget, for the budget, FY25 budget update, because I wanted to get to the salaries, the variance in the salaries that we had there. So I think we will now move forward to the monthly capital projects report. Ms. Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Calhoun and committee. I'd like to present the March 2024 Capital Projects Report. Our most current sales tax revenue collections which is our 14th month of collections in the program, was $205,000 below the cash flow model projection based with 2% growth over the prior year. Our expenditures for the programs are as follows. 2010 through 2016, $54,000. 2017 through 2022, $1.4 million. 2023 through 2028, $6.9 million. The 2023 through 2028 long-term debt, $46,000. The fixed cost of ownership 24 program is nearing completion for this school year and the spending deadline in early May. And fixed cost of ownership 25 program has commenced and is proceeding. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
All right, Ms. Robertson.
No questions. Thank you.
Did we lose Mr. Duke?
No questions.
Mr. Hollis?
No questions.
Ms. Stamp?
No questions. Thank you.
No questions.
I gotta have to give you a question. The 2010, 2016, we're down to $54,000. Is that ever going to go away?
Well, I certainly hope so, sir, and I'll defer to Mr. Barowie on that, please.
I mean,
When we complete the bus lot, we'll complete this program
That's the last thing on.
project.
and-
So
and
we've got a ways to go on that.
really, it's that far. Then I hate to put more heat on you, but the 2017, 2022, we were out at $1.4 million of expenses. How close are we to closing that? I know, it's 22 pages. And so when you kind of like look at it, you're trying to figure out when do these go away? They seem so close.
So the phase 4 program will remain with a substantial budget for some time. We have funding remaining. We have a potential project that hasn't been funded. We need to continue to keep that in place in the event that that project is needed. In the end, we have a line item for capital maintenance. So if there is not a distinguishable project or a project that's listed by line item, Mr. Hamer behind me, I'm sure he's smiling right now. He's gone. He's already taken the money and run.
Needing that subway.
Mr. Hamer has plenty of capital maintenance projects that these funds could be expended on.
And so that's like a contingency.
Correct.
Got
Yes,
it.
sir.
Thank you. No further.
I have no further questions. Thank you. All right. That's our update.
All right, so we have the March 31st ESSER update. As we've talked about over the last month, maybe 2 months, there was a plan amendment that was in progress to reclassify dollars in alignment with the final round of bonuses that were provided in March. So you'll see on this report that the bonuses have posted in terms of the amounts that were paid to teachers on March 22nd for the remaining 2,500, but the plan amendment has not posted in this month. I will share with you that the plan amendment that was submitted was approved already by the State Department during the month of April. And so the April report that you see in the next month's Audit and Finance Committee meeting will reflect the reallocation of dollars. So those negative variances will be cured in some of the areas where you have higher positive variances. Obviously, by reallocating the dollars, they'll be reduced significantly. So that'll show a much clearer picture of where we stand with the closeout of ESSER. And as you can see, compared to the total dollars received, $163 million, we've been reimbursed $122 million to date for expenditures that have posted. So our goal now, as purchasing has wrapped up for purchase services on April 19th, is to determine where we have savings, both in personnel and in purchase services, and to reallocate those dollars through a final plan amendment between July 1 and September 30th so that we can code positions that are in the budget tied to ESSER approved programming to spend those dollars and create some general fund savings in fiscal 25. And we'll bring a report to the board on that as we close this out over the next several months.
Same order, Ms. Robertson.
Okay, I was listening and calculating at the same time. So it looks like we have been reimbursed almost all of the money. I'm counting up to like 63 million. We got 22 million back minus what we're not going to get back. So we are probably just out maybe 39 million or so.
And yes, ma'am. And the reality too is once we get into fiscal 25, that last quarter, through that plan amendment, we can move some of those purchase services dollars that were denied into salaries and benefits.
Yeah.
And have those reimbursed based on those approved positions so that we don't lose out on getting the dollars.
Yeah. Okay, I got it. I was just doing some calculation. Thanks. No questions.
All right. Mr. Duke,
No question.
Mr. Hallis,
No questions.
Ms. Stamp,
No question.
Questions?
On the final plan, is that something we can do in-house, or does that have to go back up to the state?
The final plan amendment, it has to go up to the state. Each amendment has to go to the state. So there's, as we've seen, different levels of review and approval that happen. You can reallocate dollars amongst approved categories through an amendment. You can also request to either create new categories that are authorized under the ESSER law, or move funds into categories that you hadn't previously requested, and that's a more extensive process. But just to move amongst these existing categories that you see on the sheet, it's just a form that goes to the state that the superintendent has to sign. And so that one that was done for the bonuses has been approved.
Right. But we have to have theoretically all that money spent. It's not like we can issue a contract on September 25th. It has to be actually spent by
Correct.
September.
The only thing that we understand that will be allowed to extend September 30th would be the actual program administration cost. And so the 2 FTEs that we have dedicated to ESSER could be paid through December 31st of 24 with ESSER funds. So we may set aside a little bit of what we have to cover the cost of those positions through the end of the calendar year.
So when are you anticipating this final plan?
So the one that we did for the bonuses has been approved, as I said. I think we'll probably have 1 or 2 smaller amendments go forward between now and the end of the fiscal year for some projects that have been identified. And then once we get into the early part of fiscal 25 in July or August, we would submit kind of a final amendment to put those dollars into the categories where the positions are budgeted. And then we would essentially do a journal entry to move the positions into the ESSER funds to cover those positions for that 1 quarter. And then that would wipe it out.
Excellent.
It's a good and bad problem to have in a way, because we have more eligible positions than we do have ESSER dollars. So we should be able to justify spending those ESSER dollars on those positions, and then the rest of it would be GOF. But we've budgeted for 100% of those positions in the GOF since we know that they'll now be recurring as we've implemented those post ESSER.
thank you. Let's go ahead and move forward to 5D, the budget update.
All right. And I sent the presentation to Maggie as a PowerPoint. So hopefully the weighted student funding matrix chart doesn't turn into a metamorphosis this time.
39.
Yes. All right. So we have a budget update for you, generally the same format as we've seen in the past, but we've refined all the numbers for what our final recommendation is. So what we're seeking today is to present to you the first reading of the proposed budget for fiscal year 2025 and take any questions, comments from the Audit and Finance Committee, and ultimately are seeking a recommendation to refer this to the Committee of the Whole on Monday the 13th, whereby then they would refer the budget to the full board on the 20th for the full first reading. So what you see in this presentation today mirrors the book that will be given to the board at the Committee of the Whole meeting on Monday the 13th with the full first reading content. So on this slide, you'll see the FY24 budget compared to the FY24 projected. And I won't belabor the point there, but that ties exactly to the March 31st financial update that I just provided to you. So coming in total 6.05% over budget in the GOF. And then if you go to the next slide, that is a comparison from our fiscal year 24 projected to our fiscal 25 estimate. And the only thing that's changed here between scenarios is we have increased our interest revenue based upon the collections that we've experienced so far to date. We have accounts set up with the state treasurer's local government investment pool. And so our restricted cash sits in those accounts and accrues interest throughout the year. And as the market has changed over the last couple of years, we've seen the interest earnings increase substantially. I think 3 years ago, we were budgeting about $750,000 a year for interest, and this year we're projecting to post about $7 million. So commensurate with the fund balance increases that we've seen over time, that revenue is being accounted for in the budget. And so we increased the revenue for interest by $2 million from where it was previously for fiscal 25. So that puts the total revenues $40 million over the year end of fiscal 24, which is a 5.39% increase. Everything else, including the state revenues, remain the same. For us, there was a very minor variance between the House and the Senate versions of the budget, so we didn't change anything. And then if you go to the the next slide with the red header there, this is the comparison to the board approved fiscal 24 base budget and the fiscal 25 estimate. And so what this includes is, as does the prior, the revenues that I just mentioned to you compared to the board approved budget. And as you'll note on future slides, this does include the proposed 3.9 mil increase to support the $7,500 teacher pay increase, as well as the 100% of market for non-teachers classified and or certified and non-certified. So that revenue ties to the budget for all projected revenues inclusive of the 3 mil swap and the 3.9 mil increase that we'll detail in the slides that follow. Go to the next, and this is just the representative chart, and try to freeze this in your memory. We'll come to this a little bit later in the presentation when we do some comparisons amongst other districts in South Carolina in terms of where the revenue comes from. And of course, in Charleston County, a substantial portion, 65% of our revenue comes from local sources and 33% in the GOF comes from the state. Those numbers change a little bit whenever you look at all funds, including EIA and some of our special revenue. And I'll show you that a little later in the presentation. For the summary on the next slide, projecting $82.7 million in revenue growth over the fiscal 24 base budget. And then we're adding in a proposed use of $20 million in ESSER sustainability funds. So our total capacity grows to $102.7 million with all of those things included. The ESSER sustainability funds, of course, we had $37.8 million, and we're looking to utilize those over 3 years to smooth the implementation cost of the WSF. We refined our local revenues, and we're still awaiting some more information on the TIF assessments. But I really do think at this point that these numbers are going to be final. Anything that comes about, we might make a recommendation to just decrease the use of fund balance and increase the revenue offset in second reading, but it's not going to be material at this point in time. Go to the next slide. So breakdown of the new revenues from local sources, 9.3 million is coming in growth from property transfers, which we talked about previously, 8.7 million coming from new construction. The 3 mil swap is good for a total of $10 million coming from the debt fund. And then the 3.9 mil increase for the two scenarios that I just mentioned generates an additional $12.8 million to offset the cost of implementing those scenarios. So there's the detail on the ESSER sustainability funds. So $20 million in fiscal 25, 10 in fiscal 26, and then the remaining 7.8 in fiscal 27. And I will say, just for future communications, if we had an underrun of the budget in the WSF in fiscal 25, we would roll that fund balance over to fiscal 26 and then utilize that additional savings to help offset fiscal 26 and 27 and so on. So it may not be exactly to the dollar, but that's what the overall plan is in terms of what GOF requirement is in place. So we're showing you a balanced budget with all the considerations on the slides that follow. All these scenarios cost a total of $130.7 million. we are balancing the budget with non-ESSER sustainability fund balance, and I'll show you that in the long-range financial plan. And that number lines up almost exactly. I think it was within $37,000 of the actual increase in fund balance at fiscal 24 year end. So we believe that that strategy is healthy and sustainable and will help us be able to move forward with a better understanding of what we can implement year over year with revenue growth and expenditure growth requirements. So we'll go on to the next slide. So this required increases slide has not changed much, but to Mr. Grabowski's earlier point, the charter schools and Meeting Street Academy number has been updated based on the year-end revenue projections and their 135-day count certification. So we made that adjustment this year and put it in the budget. So next year should be much closer to the experience that we'll have. So $8.7 million is the resulting increase to charter school and Meeting Street Academy. Teacher salary increases. So that is the totality of the $7,500 teacher pay increase. It was 24 million at the $5,000 mark. So at 7,500, it increased to 36 million, and that's included in the budget proposed for first reading. Then if you go to the next slide, this is the non-teacher. So we have this at 100% of market with the step 33 increase, so 2 steps increased over where we are now on the scale. And then we also have the funding as has been provided previously for the school-based and the teacher assistant upgrades. So all told, a $21.9 million increase. School support. I don't believe there's been any changes to this slide. Nope, this remains the same. So no changes there to discuss. Same thing for human resources on the slide that follows. So no changes there. And to Mr. Grabowski's question earlier, that substitute increases for teachers and assistants, that's some of that additional funding that's been allocated to make sure that we're running closer to our actual experience and have some flexibility for those programs. Financial services, no changes there. CERDEP, CD, Head Start considerations. There has been one change here, which was a decrease actually. There was some funding that was requested for the Early Head Start Expanded Learning Program, and it was actually in the base budget. And so we made an adjustment to remove that as an expansion. It was $746,000 that was reflected as the first line on this sheet previously. So that decreased by that same amount to 5.4 million, but it's still in the budget. It was just there as an expansion and it didn't need to be. Learning services considerations. Don't believe there have been any changes here. So if you go on to new standard allocations, this is our reconciliation of the elimination of overlays. So the budget, we've talked about scenarios in the past where there's been these overlay positions, and majority of these overlay positions are in the location that they're assigned to, but there's not a budget associated with it. They were essentially being paid for with an offset from salary savings. And so we went through and did a comprehensive review of all of the areas that needed to be addressed with new standard allocations so that they could be built into the base budget and will be subjected to an annual process of review to make sure that they line up with the needs for schools. So this includes funding for 1.0 FTE guidance counselor at every school. And that doesn't mean an increase of a 1.0 FTE. That just means the rounding up to 1.0 FTE where they currently have less than 1.0. Limited funding for the reinstatement of an all-county band program, some additional funding for CTE teachers. The next line is base allocations for foreign language, some additional gifted and talented teachers, interventionists, and teachers that are at Wynwood Farms. Again, they were overlays, but they're allocations that have to exist, and we wanted to make sure that they were actually budgeted for so that there's a dollar amount that corresponds to those positions going forward. Some funding for high school credit recovery, and then the existing teachers that are at Pinehurst. Principal was able to fund several of these positions with the WSF, but this is to maintain that program at the current allocation, which I believe is 10 teachers that serve in the co-teacher roles at Pinehurst Elementary, plus the administration fees for us to work with Clemson University in that relationship for them to create a pipeline for us. Next slide. So we went through and reconciled the ESSER program. You've seen in previous presentations where ESSER impact statements were done and all of the WSF school-based positions were accounted for on that side. These were some non-school-based programs that we needed to pick up in the GOF. So the family coach coordinators, the Canvas administrator, program with the University of Virginia, and then the director of accelerated schools are now budgeted formally in the GOF and were previously supported by ESSER.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so for the Megan, can you go back one more slide? I have questions on both. Yeah. So the all county band program. Can Miss Huggins, can you speak to that? Is that like a band that's going to serve the entire district?
Thank you for asking, Mrs. Roberson. The All County Band Program is actually something that was cut from prior budgets, whereby students who were selected across the district were able to come together from all schools in the district through a selection process and participate themselves in All County Band. It's something that most districts have that got cut from our fine arts allocations in years past that really is a need post-COVID to bring back to the district. So it's not something that serves all schools. It's something that all students get to participate, or excuse me, students from all schools who audition and make the All County Band get to participate in district-wide.
Okay, thank you. And the next slide, Maggie, the family coach coordinators, are these all of the family coach coordinators that were paid for out of ESSER, or only for a particular school?
So, Mrs. Roberson, thank you for that question too. As you know, we have 3 feeder pattern initiatives that are occurring in the district as part of ESSER right now, D20, D23, and D4. The family coach coordinators are the family support positions from D20. So as we discussed in some prior meetings, there were pieces of the feeder patterns that continue to be funded post-ESSER. One of the things that is funded post-ESSER in the D20 are the family coach coordinators. The principals of these schools put in a program impact report for this position, and it was assessed like all of the school-based initiatives of the 90 points. If I recall correctly, the family coach coordinator position earned 84. As you may recall, anything above 70 from the ESSER program reports we funded. This is one of the few things above the 70 that wasn't school-based, that was more of a feeder pattern based. And so we maintain this in the FY25 budget because of the linkage it has to increased student performance, specifically decreased chronic absenteeism in D20 schools. CPA, for example, saw a decline from about 20% chronic absenteeism last year to 14% this year. Does that make sense?
It does. It really does. My concern is not a concern. I totally agree with this line item. If D23 did not know to put in an impact, a request for it, because the family support, I think they were called family support specialists out in D23, they did a phenomenal job as well.
Yes, ma'am. I've heard some of the great reports coming out of D23. I will say that I think a principal or two may have picked up some of those positions in the WSF. I see Mr. Prentice nodding his head. We know a lot more about the WSF than we than most. So I think those positions were picked up.
Okay.
Mr. Prentice said, we'll review these things annually though, as we've promised the board. And I appreciate you specifically being a champion for that to determine their impact, because this was one of the highest scoring program impact reports that the district had.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Maggie.
Since we're on this slide. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, what is the high school credit recovery? What is that about?
Thank you, Ms. Stamp. It's good to hear your voice. High school credit recovery is an opportunity by which high school students who aren't successful in their high school classes get to retake the course to earn a higher grade and to earn those credits toward their graduation. So we recognized at some point that we needed to allocate more funding for that as we think about college and career readiness and ensuring that we're graduating as many students as we can. Grabowski.
Thank you.
Thank you too, Ms. Stamps.
And why are we paying the University of Virginia 150,000?
Mrs. Simmons, the UVA work is a continuation of some of the elementary transformation school work. Mr. Grabowski, I think the board previously approved the contract for UVA, but this allows the continuation of support for the transformation schools that are led by Ms. Quinetta White. Specifically, it provides professional development to the principals in those elementary schools in the support of the development of 90-day plans, and their continuous improvement models to help students. It too, the items on this slide, as you'll see, were items that the few items that made it through the ESSER program impact process. You'll remember there were about 150 requests and very few made it through. These are the items that scored 70 or above that showed a significant impact on student
So this had a
achievement.
high impact.
Yes, sir. In
Absolutely.
essence, Ms. Simmons,
Got it.
please.
No, you said it well, but as we phased out the acceleration schools, we picked up newly identified schools. And so dropping off one group and picking up another because it has been so impactful.
Thank you, Ms. Simmons.
And the director of acceleration schools, this is a position that we've had and we've just funded. And that's
It
just-
is.
It's responsible for all of the schools.
But as you know, we reduced a difficult thing to do. We reduced the central staff by 52 positions. And so when you see us add something back, you know it's because it had significant impact. So
Got it.
this position was funded through ESSER and complete. Our goal is to be transparent with the board. It is a senior level position, but the person in this position is in a school every single day. In fact, I think she's in Simmons Pinckney today. So we believe that it had significant impact on the turnaround model that Mrs. Haynes led.
Yeah, I think I'm just trying to figure out where it's falling underneath the org chart. So this is a new position that will basically
You were right the first time, Mr. G. This is a position that has existed for the last
has
3
existed
years.
within the org
Yeah,
chart. So we're
the last 2
continuing to
years.
fund just using GOF money to fund this position.
Yes, sir.
I agree with the need for it.
Yes, sir.
It just seems.
You're
out of place.
exactly right. It's the need to transition it to
Got
the GOF as we continually monitor the success. Thank you, Mr. Prentice. Sorry.
Great, thank you. So that ends the expansion slides that total all of the funds that we've placed into the budget proposed for fiscal 25. The next section of the presentation details the weighted student funding formula. And there aren't any changes to these slides in particular, other than the timeline and the progress towards implementing the WSF. And Ms. Huggins, I don't know if you'd like to speak to anything particular with that. I'm happy to go over the schedule and where we are with our work to make sure that we implement the financial components of it.
You just proceed, Mr.
Okay.
Prentice.
So if you go to slide 23, there we go. So we've shown you this chart previously, and the WSF group that's been established, we've been meeting weekly, if not more than once per week, and 15 to 20 people that have come together from all areas of the organization with the project management plan that's been established to track progress towards the implementation of these various objectives. And so the chart that you see has various other subtasks that exist below it that we've been steadily making progress to implement. So we are completed, for example, with our needs assessment and personnel requests and approval of those submissions through the assurance forms for the WSF. And we've since now gone back and reconciled all those requests. So the schools submitted their assurance form with their estimated salaries for these positions. We went through and reconciled to make sure that those numbers were correct. Went back to the schools if we had any questions, and then took all of that data and aggregated it into a master summary that ties to the WSF funding that's established in the proposed FY25 budget. So our work really now through the end of the fiscal year going into fiscal 25 is to make sure that the resources are in place for them to be able to recruit and fill those positions, assigning the position control numbers and building all of that out, issuing contracts through that process. And then we're working on transitioning into putting together the procurement guidance, the financial report, and all of the metrics that will be established for the tracking of success of the implementation of the WSF.
I'll just add very quickly, I thank Ms. Roberson at the last board meeting. She asked for the purpose of the Audit and Finance Committee members about the academic piece of this. It looks highly financial, but we did the academic side of the house did collaborate with Mr. Prentice and team on this part. Right now, specifically, we're in the process, most notably, of working with Dr. Margarita Rosa out of Georgetown University to build out the metrics to assess the effectiveness systemically of the WSF work. As we've discussed most recently with external stakeholders who've been very inquisitive about how we're going to ensure that we're measuring the effectiveness of our financial contributions to this work, we've talked very specifically about having a consistent means to do so across the organization, unlike we may have done previously in allowing principals to determine their own metrics to gauge success of certain programs. And so we are very determined to make this or continue with a very academic and finance-driven project management plan, as you'll see here, to ensure that we're serving kids well.
Ms. Huggins, thank you for that. I sincerely appreciate you acknowledging that the framework that you're working on for the academic piece.
Thank you, Ms. Roberson, for bringing it up last time, because had you not, I wouldn't have been conscious of sharing it, but it is embedded there because this is highly financial, but clearly the academics are really what's key to the success of our kids.
Right. We're looking to see what return we're getting on our investment.
That's exactly right, Mrs. Roberson. ROI is very important. And not just saying that something did have a return on investment, right? Is the significance of the return on investment given the amount we put into it. For example, if we just go back up a couple slides, you ask about the family coach coordinators. This process will allow us to determine whether the $496,000 yields a significant investment comparatively speaking to the students' achievement in the schools where those folks serve. And so it's very complex and way above my head, but I'm thankful that there are a lot smarter people around me to help support the work and help us figure out how to do so in a sophisticated manner that'll serve kids well.
Absolutely. And when I see the family coaches and I think about the chronic absenteeism and the truancy issues, and if they are assigned to that, then we know that it's their responsibility to stay, to monitor those particular items. And so now we have a way to monitor what we are paying them for. And if the absentee rates go down, truancy go down, we're getting a return on our investment.
That's exactly right, Mrs. Roberson. And so in that same example, just like you said, at CPA, for example, Mrs. Sheets, when she came down for the student data reviews recently, the growth that her students have seen this year really is just significant. Same with Mrs. Malone at Sanders Clyde. So what I asked her was, Mrs. Sheets, tell me to what you attribute the success of your students. And one of the things she said, Ms. Huggins, the family coach coordinator, she said, look at how my chronic absenteeism rate has dropped. My students are in school. That we don't experience this sort of low rate here. And I attribute that primarily to these folks being in homes. And so working with parents and ensuring they understand the importance of being in school. So we can directly correlate in many instances the effects of some of this work with student achievement. And again, it's going to have to be a sophisticated model way above my head. Mr. Prentice understands it, but again, I'm thankful we have experts to help us correlate what typically would be something very, very subjective.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. Thank you.
So the next slide is a continuation of that implementation plan. And so the things that follow, the guardrails, all of those items remain the same from prior presentations, and we're happy to have any dialogue or answer questions there. But really, there's a lot of excitement that's swelled around this, even at the staff level, and it's been encouraging to sit in those implementation meetings and to have folks from the finance side and the academic side collaborating and working together to be able to pull this to the budget and to have the level of sophistication and the administrative part that goes into making this successful. So appreciate all the hard work that's happened and the number of hours every week that go into building this with the budget process. But we feel like we're in a really good spot right now going into first reading, and won't spend any further time on that unless there's any other questions.
Move forward, we can ask any further questions at the end.
Okay, so go on to slide 28. This is where we talk about the budget reductions. So this number has been shown previously and it's been refined. We've been able to work through the reductions to make the reductions that we previously stated would be included in the budget. And in doing so, where we felt like we, could make reductions to account for historical underruns of expenditures, we've also established a risk pool to account for any areas where we might have unanticipated expenditures that come up throughout the year. So those reductions have all been included in the base budget that you see by way of the reduced positions, the reduced purchase services, and other risk pooling initiatives. So that breaks down the overall categories of how that was approached.
Can I just ask a question, just make sure I understand that? Am I understanding it right that we have these positions that we've, and I know it's difficult and sensitive, but we've made a decision on those positions that should have a financial savings of 4.6, but you put in a $2.5 million pool back in to address the fact that there'll be pressure points where we have to add costs back. Is that what that 2.5?
So the pool is around 1.1 million. So the reductions that we took, we set aside some of the money that we reduced just to make sure that we had some coverage in the event that we had, unknown things come up throughout the year, but overall reduced the budget.
So it's not 2.5.
It's not a $2.5 million risk pool now.
Okay, it's more like $1 million-ish.
It's a 1.13 million that's set aside in the risk pool. And so my hope is that we'll continue to see our experience refine year over year, and we can continue to refine that risk pool based on the actual budget experience each year. I do think we have some additional initiatives in fiscal 26 that we can consider as we continue to refine our salaries and benefits expectations. You notice we're seeing an underrun $13-14 million between salaries and benefits into this fiscal year. And so we'll consider some adjustments to the average salaries that we use for budgeting purposes to try to get that a little bit tighter as well. But right now we just focus the risk pool on operations so non-salary lines.
So would you be able to characterize, first of all, I'm very glad you have that risk pool concept, because from a risk management perspective, when you take away those positions, even though a lot of those were unfilled, what have you, presumably not all of them would fit that category, and or we thought we had the need for those positions. There's a risk of some pressure coming back that we have some need not fulfilled.
So
would you be able to comment on where do you think we should be? Where are you concerned that we might feel pushback?
So
Don't use my name, Mr. Prentice.
No, I was just going to say, so the risk pool is actually not established to offset costs from the reductions in positions. The reductions in positions are full true reductions in headcount in central offices that have been made, which impacts the salary and benefits line items only. We took additional reductions in non-salary line items, such as, and Mr. Broe could speak to some of this, areas where we were spending money on rentals for events, and areas where we were paying membership and dues or had traditional, underruns at the end of the year, and we didn't feel like we needed those full budgets. And so we just kind of universally trimmed in a number of areas. But to offset what we trimmed, instead of having padding in every single department throughout the system, we set aside a central risk pool that we can allocate out if we find ourselves going, oops, we might have trimmed that just a little bit too much.
And easier for you to manage if it's centralized.
Yeah, correct.
Thank you.
And Mr. Broe, I don't know if you want to comment on the specific.
Oh, yeah, I think the one great example we have for the risk pooling is our auditoriums. We typically have $50,000 or so set aside if there's an urgent repair at the end of May or the first week of June. And we haven't often used that funding, but we had it. By having Mr. Prentice put that having it available for risk pool, if we do have that emergency, he has the money for us in that emergency. And if we don't need it, the money's not in our budget. So.
And conversely, we also looked at areas where we were traditionally not budgeting for things that we did need. So for example, we were spending money every year on the AV and video services for our graduations. And it was like, well, every year we have to transfer money from a different account to fund. Let's budget that in the base budget so that we don't have to pull that from a risk pool, because we know that's going to happen every year. And so the risk pool should really be there for things that come up that we don't know about, and then we can react to them and address them in future fiscal years if we believe they to be recurring. But again, I just want to say that we also went through and looked at areas where we've historically needed money and haven't had the money available to try to make the risk pool, as insulated as possible.
So we've had the financial good fortune not the operational good fortune, but of coming in, of having these savings benefit us at the end of the year with our fund balance, sounds like we'll be a little less likely to get as much benefit.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, try to
Financial.
run this a little, a little closer to, our proposed experience here with the budget. I like to come on a budget this size, between 1% to 2% would be ideal. And, you can see this year, the variances in revenues are, running up close to 10%. And so, the closer we get on budgeting our revenues and expenditures, the more we can allocate the dollars elsewhere to fund programs that we truly need versus padding budgets in areas that we might not use those dollars.
Oh my gosh, this is awesome. Did I say that out loud?
You did. I'm glad you weren't mic'd. I mean, I'm glad you weren't muted. And Mrs. Roberson, you'll be happy to know that Mr. Prentice has one of those no buttons. You know that that button that says this is easy. He's got one that says no, 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 no. So anytime I call, he goes no, 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 no.
I'd be happy to bring it to the board meeting next week if you'd like.
Can you, so why drop it from 2.5 to 1.3?
So the 2.5 and the 1.13 million was just as we started to go through the final balancing process of the budget, there's a point at which I wanted to be able to lock down the actual full appropriations. And so a couple of weeks ago, we said, all right, we're going to go ahead and whatever we have in the risk pool is where we're going to hit the pause button and stop this because we believe we've been through everything that we need to go through. And so we had a couple of requests that came up as we were going through our final balancing exercise. And instead of having to increase our appropriations or find additional revenue to support those things, we just balanced them against the risk pool. So that's just where that number landed. But in order to go through this process, just to give you an example, we pulled a report out of the system that analyzed accounts that over the last 2 years had a balance at the end of the year greater than $50,000. And so went through those and determined where we could make adjustments because of, 2 years you had greater than $50,000 remaining in an account. Statistically speaking, you're probably gonna have that same experience in the year that follows. And those became areas of interest for creating the risk pool and reallocating those dollars elsewhere. And so we'll continue to refine that and do that, more over time. I don't think you can stop and just do it once. I think we'll have to continue to do these things year over year because there may be costs that decrease and there may be costs that increase in different areas. And we just, use that exercise to try to be as agile as possible. But the risk pool is really just now kind of an internal balancing mechanism so that we can keep the net appropriations in the budget resolution presented to the board the same. So go to the next slide. This is the full picture. And so that line there that you see, the $847.5 million that's bolded towards the middle third or middle 2/3 of the screen, that's the net appropriations that we're proposing for fiscal 25. So that number we've kind of frozen. And so anything that's happening as we go through our final exercise is just internal kind of counterbalancing measure that we're doing. But from the top, salaries and benefits, $95 million variance over this year, which is a 19% increase. It includes all those initiatives that we've discussed so far today. Purchase services, 6.1% increase, and includes everything that you've seen today. Supplies and capital, very minimal increase in terms of the overall dollars that are required there. Membership and dues, we previously talked about this because I used the FY24 projected year end. That projected year end includes some of those issues that came about with ESSER. That includes instructional elements as well. So that's why a lot of those ESSER things were instructional in nature. And so the decrease is really just a factor of the year end for fiscal 24 being higher than the fiscal 24 budget and then reducing back down to a normal number for fiscal 25. And then our transfers includes all of our increases in charter school payments and our implementation of the WSF. So while the WSF is $32.8 million and the charter school payment increase is $8.7 million, the reason it's a $38 million increase is because, as you saw, we went over about $3 million this year in the charter school transfers. So the FY24 projected is a little higher than the approved budget. But all told, $847.5 million in expenditures, and then net of our proposed revenues of $805.1 million, which includes the use of the ESSER sustainability funds, would require a use of fund balance of $42.4 million. And if you go back to the March budget update, our projected variance at the end of the year is 42.522 million. And we're proposing the use of 42.485 million. So it's literally within $40,000 of our projected year end. And so that's the overall effort to balance the budget.
So it looks like we're about to use 42, but we basically just, instead of putting it inside of the fund balance, we're just.
It essentially with the way that this is proposed, the fund balance that we have now as of FY23 audit going into fiscal 24 would remain exactly the same if we spent every dollar that we've budgeted in fiscal 25, because we're budgeting what we're expecting to contribute an increase with.
Right.
So, and we'll get into the long range model in a couple of slides. And so, while we're budgeting 42.4 million, I do expect, because of the, tightness of the budget this year in terms of refining some of these numbers, that we will actually use fund balance this year. I don't expect that we use the full $42.4 million. And so you'll see some of that refinement in the model where I've adjusted our year-end experience based on some of our historical trends to be a little more true to form.
Cool.
And so go to the next slide, just the breakdown of the categories of expenditures that you've seen in previous presentations, 69% being salaries and benefits, and then 14% between purchase services and transfers. And that transfers number is a much larger number this year because of the implementation of the WSF. That will gradually decrease as the ESSER sustainability fund balance is used year over year over year. And then if you go to the next slide, so this is just the re-inclusion of the property tax increase. So the impact of 1 mil to a property valued at $300,000. And if anyone's interested in it, I have an interactive version of this where you can enter the property value, the assessment ratio, and the millage increase, and it'll spit out what the impact is from that millage increase. It's also on there's a calculator tool on the Charleston County website that you can use that's pretty cool, and select your tax district and everything. So go to the next slide. This comparison we showed previously, this is the breakdown of millage between Charleston, Berkeley, and Dorchester 2 school districts, and the comparison as an example of a grocery store that we talked about before, that's essentially the same footprint, but in 2 different areas, and showing the value and the millage levy that exists in 2 different counties and what the resulting tax bill is. So the budget for fiscal 25, as recommended, would take the operating levy up to 145.2 mils, which is the 3 mil swap plus the 3.9 mil increase, and it would take the debt levy down to 23 mils for a total of an increase of 3.9 over the 164.3 that's currently levied. And if you go to the next slide, this is the slide that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that I wanted you to freeze your memory on in terms of the breakdown of local to state funding. So the State Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Office has put together a nice dashboard on their website that takes in all of the annual audited financials from school districts throughout the state. And they have a comparison tool with a map of the state, and you can you zoom in on it and click on the school district, and it'll pull up all the data from that district. And so I pulled up Charleston, Greenville, Dorchester 2, and Berkeley just to show you the disparity that exists. Some of this has to do with the index of taxpaying ability and some of those kind of things, but really points out, how much state funding we receive compared to our peers. And so we're 60% funded with local once you include all the special revenue sources that we receive from the state, and 40% funded from the state, whereas Dorchester 2 is 15% local and 85% from the state. And so when you look at those tables, you can see that their funding that they receive from the state covers substantially more than the cost of some of those elements that they're required to fund with those dollars, compared to where Charleston County is right at breaking even, less than $1 million of breaking even. And the same would be the case for Greenville at 22% compared to 78% state, and Berkeley at 23% local and 77% state. So just an interesting look at the state as a whole. And you have to take into consideration a number of factors, and the assessed value of properties in Charleston County is substantially higher. But you also look at the fact that we're doing what we're doing in this system and leading the state in compensation, leading the state, and implementing the WSF and some of these other things with the lower percent, or, in terms of a millage levy, our millage levy is one of the lowest, and the lower, I think, 5 to 7 millage levies statewide for school districts. So we've got higher assessments, but we still have a lower levy, and we still have to fund a more substantial portion of our budget with local dollars to be able to balance what we're doing. And that dashboard, as it updates year over year, is just a good resource. So you can click on that link at the top of the page, and you can go and look at all those different scenarios online. Next slide, we have the same teacher compensation examples as well as the non-teacher compensation examples. So we've included the 7,500 example that's represented there in the base budget, and on the next slide, the 100% of market. And as Mr. Brigman presented at the last board meeting, I guess it was, I think he presented the classification examples where people would move from different bands within the DBM based on the upgrade analysis that they've done. So all of that's been included as well that you saw previously. If you go to the next slide, the long range model. So we have updated this based on the first reading of the budget. So you'll see for fiscal 24, we're projecting our fund balance to increase to approximately $228.6 million. If you use the board policy, the requirement is approximately $112.8 million, which is that 16.67% using the prior 2 years averages, and then calculating that as 2 months essentially of reserves. And it's important to note that our policy is double the state minimum policy. So what I'm reflecting there is the policy that's adopted by this school board, which is at 16.67%. The state requirement is 8.3%. So you've got your fund balance at 228 million, your requirement at 112, and you can see between fiscal 25 and fiscal 28 how we gradually use that fund balance, and as our requirement gradually increases. But we also get to a point where by fiscal 28, we're at $944 million in revenues and $947 million in expenditures. And so the use of fund balance is decreasing substantially over those years as we kind of step into this revenue growth and are able to kind of align our expenditure growth with growth in the market and growth in cost of living and consumer price index and things like that. So while we're given substantial raises this year, and we have a larger portion for next year, after fiscal 26, we start to go to more of a consumer price index driven increase year over year to continue to maintain our alignment with the market. And it's not as much these very large jumps that we've seen over the last couple of years that we've done to get caught up with where we needed to be. And then you can also see at the bottom, if you go back once, I apologize, Maggie, the projected millage remains flat from 138.3 to 145.2 and sustains the 145.2 throughout all of those years. I do believe that this is conservative at this point in time. There's refinement that will continue to happen with this through the year. And we'll present updates to this as we go throughout the process. But I feel comfortable at this point in time recommending the budget with all of this information at hand, knowing that we can sustain the growth requirements from the programs that we're recommending in the budget with a use of some of the fund balance and eventually step our way out of it. So if we go to the next slide. So next steps, recommended actions, we're finalizing the resolution, the budget book.
I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
Like if we can just go back to this. So as I understand it, we're using the fund balance. We're seeing on the line projected revenue and expenses coming to a point where it's almost, an equal number in 2028. But in 2027, we really get to that magical number to whereas we're right at the fund balance recommended, and then we continue to keep going down. You've got your expenses and hopefully expenses and revenue going up, but it almost seems like on the projection it's going, your expenses are going to keep on increasing, your revenues and it's going to be separated and your fund balance. So what you're saying is going to flatline below our requirement?
So the fund balance, those green bars, they increase using the prior year's average actuals. So you take 2 prior years, average them together, and then calculate what 2 months of that average is worth. And so those bars are created based on what I believe the budgets would be. And so I think that's what I said. I think this model is conservative. When you look at what the actuals end up as, that's the number that you actually use for calculating the policy. So I wanted to make sure that I didn't show a too high drive scenario for the overall long range model at this point in time, because really I'm showing pre FY24 year end numbers. I'm showing FY25 at the budget, which we know that, those numbers are going to likely come in with revenues exceeding the budget and expenditures underrunning to a certain degree, although we talked about a much tighter percentage than we've seen this year. So given the proximity, the fact that we were $9 million off in fiscal 28 compared to our fund balance requirement, and we were, just $3 million off from being able to balance the budget without a use of fund balance at all, as a overall percentage of the whole, I felt like that was close enough to the target at this point in the outlook. And then as we get into fiscal 25, I'll continue to refine that, and bring us out one more fiscal year to 29, because the goal would be fiscal 29 being balanced with either a net neutral, meaning revenues and expenditures matching, or being able to balance with the millage levy that we've established and having a reserve for fund balance built into the budget to where we could actually make a small contribution each year as our revenues and expenditures grow. So I'd like to eventually flip those lines and be able to have a little bit more flexibility. It just, because you've got reassessment in fiscal 26 and not necessarily knowing the outcomes of that, that's another factor to represent. I'm running that conservatively based on our experience in 2020 reassessment. And so assuming that comes in higher than we've projected, that could also bring that fund balance up over what we've shown. So just a couple of things that are at the forefront right now that we've got to kind of work through to be able to refine the model a little bit further. And I didn't want to show reassessment, at close to 15% growth when it may settle in around 11 or 12, and have to come back to you and say, "Ooh, we were, we a little too high drive on that."
Because obviously my biggest concern is millage rate, not on the large companies like Lowe's, but on so many of the smaller businesses. And at 3.9, with some understanding, at least as I look at these forecasts, you're not anticipating a millage increase for the next couple of years.
No, I'm not. And the other thing that we're looking at is we've talked about this long-term debt restructuring. And so we haven't fully worked through the model on that, but we're meeting with financial advisors, and we may actually be able to do some additional millage swaps to decrease our debt levy and move it over to our operating levy to support programs in the GOF if needed. But I really believe, based on what we're showing here, that if we can get to that sustainable levy based on all the programs that we've talked about implementing at the 145.2, that we can keep that number flat as we move forward and be more predictable. It's kind of one of those things where you have to levy taxes to be able to support the operations of a school district, and what's that sweet spot going to be, and then being able to sustain that. And so, ideally, when you get to, I guess it would be fiscal 30, which would be the next reassessment following the reassessment that we're going to go through next year.
Right.
Ideally, assuming you've hit that stride, you'd actually like to be able to start to back off of that millage a little bit as you see that substantial growth in the tax base through the increase in appraised property values. But until we can hit that sustainable stride, I don't think we'll be able to do that. But I'm hoping that that's what this is going to allow us to do.
Because I think that's very important to this, controlling the story as it gets out, especially with the teacher salary increase, considering what happened last year and what's potentially could be happening this year, along with, because what we didn't have last year until after we approved the budget was what the 3-year impact, and what you're giving us now is basically a 5-year impact of what we're happening with this millage increase and what is sustainable and the expenses on the projections.
Correct.
So I definitely commend you for doing that.
And the nice thing about this too is, fiscal 24 is all an estimate right now, but by the end of this calendar year, we can turn that into a, real number from the audit. And then we can start to show fiscal 25 through fiscal 29 going forward. And that'll give us even a little bit more clarity.
Yes, sir.
So first of all, I guess we're talking about this now, right?
Yeah, this is live.
So I think this is perhaps the most important slide. It's the money slide, and it's the long-term slide, which is I'm super appreciative of the work that I know you and the team have put into getting to this point. And I think this is really important for us to be able to understand and support. My only two, well, I love the slide, so I hate to even start to come up with potential adjustments to it because you can't satisfy everybody. But I think expressing the fund balance as a percentage of revenues, because that's the metric, I think that's helpful as an add. I think it's important that whether it's on the slide or elsewhere, that we recognize what, I know we have a target that we've established based on the methodology you described a few minutes ago. But we also need to keep that in context with how Moody's looks at us and our peers. And I think that target per Moody's is for our credit rating is slightly higher, just a few percentage points. So we just need to be cognizant of the fact that while we have this target that we've identified, Moody's has a threshold that's even a little bit higher than that. And so I'm especially sensitive to, personally, I'm sensitive to us pushing below even that target, because I think in my mind, our target should be a little bit higher even than the one we've got. So that's my primary comment. The obvious observation here is that we're using up a huge chunk of fund balance in this next year. And the concern that while we talk about it as a balanced budget, it's balanced by using fund balance. So it's not really balanced. And so while this isn't a train wreck tomorrow or the next year, and I hear you completely, with our debt tools, we may have an ability to sensitize this over time. So we've got time to navigate this. But we just need to keep an eye on this and navigate. If this is what is settled on, we're going to need to pay closer attention over the next year or two. It'll be great because he'll have more time. We'll have more time with this tighter budget scenario to see how this works. So it's all great, but with some discomfort in the gut.
Yeah, and that, using fund balance to balance the budget always gives heartburning conversation when you think about what that is. When you look at how much we've accumulated over the last few years and what we actually need, this is kind of a way to step into sustaining operations as our tax base grows. And so the thought doing, a substantial amount this year, as long as it was not in excess of what we contributed this year, is we'll see a nice increase in the tax base next year with reassessment that'll kind of step into that and eliminate a substantial portion of it. Just based on looking at this, you drop down to using fund balance in the amount of just 23 million next year. So, I mean, it substantially drops off just because of that growth in the tax base. And then the other thing I'll say, talking to the bond rating agencies and looking at where we need to be. And I talked to some folks. I was at a conference in Miami with underwriters and financial analysts and everything with markets over the last week, talking about experiences in the low country with natural disasters and insurance and some of those kind of things, and how climate impacts ratings and the overall risk assessment to issuers in these types of markets. They look at a number of things, including what some of the risks aversion maybe to how we are insured and how we can tolerate some of the things that happen in our area. And Mr. Grabowski, I know you and I talked about that. And so like when we present to Moody's for upcoming debt, we look at what some of those risks are, and we did an analysis with our insurance company in the past couple of weeks. For example, if we were to have a Hurricane Hugo that came through the area that wiped out, significant portion of our infrastructure, we know we have about $2.9 billion in appraised property throughout the system. And if we had a major event and pair that at the 500-year flood rate, I think the loss would be about 300 million, but based on how we're insured, our out of pocket would be less than 30 million. And so, knowing some of those things in terms of how that could impact our fund balance very quickly before we got reimbursement from the federal government through federal aid is helpful to be able to present to them too, because when they look at it, they go, oh my gosh, you guys, according to your balance sheet, and all these assets that you have on your books, if you suffered a major impairment, it could wipe you out. And so we're able to turn around and answer that question and say, well, it would be a significant impact, but because of how we've layered our insurance, we're protected from that risk to the degree that we would fall, within the state's requirement for fund balance and liquidity. The other piece of this too is with the fund balance that we have now, we are getting substantially ahead of even needing to issue tax anticipation notes, which we've done in the past several years to be able to account for cash flows between October and December point of the year was typically when we bottomed out before property taxes came in strong. And I think by maintaining the 16% or slightly above as we continue to grow, being that a lot of our expenditures are smooth evenly throughout the year, with salaries and benefits being the largest portion, that we can still sustain without having to issue a major tax anticipation note to be able to keep operations running. And then the last piece of that is, because of the sales tax that we have now, we've been steadily paying off our long-term debt that was issued, the GO bonds and the installment purchase revenue bonds in the past. And so when we do go to market, we're not going to market for 25-year terms any longer, and they're able to rate us looking at a much shorter term issuance, which helps just the overall consideration for the metrics that they're looking at compared to a 25 or 30-year long-term deal. So a lot of good things that are happening, just to highlight, with the way that the community has supported the school district and given us the benefit of having that sales tax compared to having to go out to market and issue bonds that are supported by the ad valorem levy. And that's part of why we've been able to decrease that levy the way we have. There's been some conversation about being quote unquote debt free, and I don't think that ever happens. And I know that's not something anybody wants to hear in a system of this size, because we're going to have to continue to maintain our buildings. We're going to have to continue to issue bans for fixed cost of ownership and things like that. But the nice thing about those is, even though we get rated on them, all of those are paid off within 12 months. And so, they're typically just assigning, MIG rating or whatever to those issuances. And the review is a breeze compared to a standard long-term issuance. And so we're getting much closer to being able to just issue short-term bans for the overall capital maintenance component, and all of our future debt will just be sales tax, which is nice.
To make sure we keep the community with the sales tax.
Yeah, you got to keep the sales tax up. So that is a risk. And we have some detail in the first reading budget presentation showing you what our 8% threshold is, because obviously with the sales tax program, all those bonds that we issue are external to the 8% cap. But if we ever found ourselves in a position where we needed to issue bonds, we have about $150 million in 8% capacity that we could turn around and issue, supported by ad valorem, if we needed to. So we're under leveraged from that standpoint in terms of what we could do if we needed to issue debt on the fly for something that wasn't supported by the penny.
All right. So with this, I guess this is the next slide. Go to.
Sure. Yeah, we're wrapping up here. So the last slide with some recommendation and next steps. So we're finalizing the resolution in the budget book. We'll have that on board docs by the end of the week, going into the committee of the whole on Monday. And then the request is that today, Audit and Finance Committee has conversation and ultimately makes a recommendation to the committee of the whole on the budget, so that it can move forward for first reading. And then would go forward to the board meeting on the 20th for first reading. And then we would move into second reading and public hearing in the month of June. So just one more budget workshop on Monday, and then another Audit and Finance Committee meeting in June to show where we are between first and second. And I think we should be in pretty good shape. So the last two slides are just a repeat of our overall budget philosophy, which I think we've now hit all four of these bullets in terms of considering growth, reallocating amongst our levies. We've used fund balance and considered the risks and the thought behind that to make sure that we can start to spend that down in a way that's sustainable. And then lastly, as we've discussed, the millage, but feel good about the levy and the fact that we're able to do something that's substantially lower than what Act 388 allows by way of our CPI and growth. And that's something else we'll show you at first reading, is what you have in your millage bank. And you have over 20 mills in the millage bank that you legally could levy if you wanted to support operations, and to be able to do the 3.9. Ultimately, you're going to lose millage from the bank that you've accumulated on that 3-year look back for lack of utilization. And there's nothing wrong with that if you don't need it. And then last slide is just the calendar of upcoming meetings.
All right. Whew. Any questions? Let's start with
that was a marathon.
Mm-hmm.
So, Daniel, so to balance the budget, we are using the 42 million from the fund balance, and we're also using a 3.5 mil increase, or that's our all inclusive.
So we're using the $42.4 million of fund balance, and then included in the revenues is 3.9 mils of an increase to be able to provide. It ties dollar for dollar to the $7,500 for teachers compared to the $5,000 scenario, as well as the 100% of market for non-teachers.
Okay, 3.9. Okay. And I'm going to ask a very layman question. I'm going to tell y'all I'm a counselor. So here's my question. The slide that showed the comparison to Greenville, Dorchester, and Berkeley, and Charleston with the local revenues that we use versus the state. What's the reason, again, you may have said it, that our state funding is so low? And I let me preface this with my statement. Whenever I go to the Capitol to lobby for monies for teacher pay increase, they always tell me and Dr. Temple that we have money in our fund balance. That's why they don't give us monies when we come up there to lobby. So I appreciate you showing me that pie chart, because now, it's making me think that they're not giving us a whole lot of revenues from the state, but they always tell us that when we go up there, well, it's because we have plenty of money in our fund balance and we don't use it. So how do we, navigate that?
So I'm glad you asked that question, and this is kind of partly related to Mr. Griffin's question as well. We have seen a substantial laser focus from the Senate in particular this year on the fund balances that school districts are carrying. I think because they have heard that cry for increased funding. And part of what we were told coming out of some of the hearings and the meetings we had at the association level was, be mindful of how much fund balance you're carrying so that it justifies, continued increases from the state for increased state funding. And so we're understanding that there may be an implementation as a proviso in this year's state budget where we have to report our fund balance to the state on a monthly basis, because they want to see district by district, month by month, how much fund balance you're carrying as a percentage of your budget, to understand how much funds the districts are carrying that they're not utilizing from local dollars, or fund balance carryover from the prior year. The other piece of that is a lot of this is formula driven. So the way the state aid to classrooms funding formula works, looking at the index of taxpaying authority and all those kind of things, because of our tax base and the way the formula works statewide, that it just kind of creates a disparity for Charleston County. We don't have a huge growth in student population right now. We've got a huge growth in actual local tax base in terms of the year-over-year increase compared to that of other counties throughout the state. And as it looks at that formula, the counties that are very economically successful, or have strong growth in the local market are not being rewarded with major increases to funding at the state level. When a lot of that state funding, the major increases are going to those districts that have a lower indices and their own ability to pay for things with local dollars. But it's interesting because if you go back to the origin of all of this, the funding that the state is providing us, when Act 388 came about, they increased the state sales tax rate by that extra 1%. And that was when it went, I think, from 5% to 6% back in 2006. And so all the collections of sales tax statewide are going into a fund, and then those funds are being redistributed to school districts. And Charleston County as a county has one of the highest rates or dollar values of collection of sales tax statewide. So there's a disparity there that's created because we're collecting a lot of the taxes, but then the reallocation that happens through the state formula, it's not coming back to us dollar for dollar because of that funding formula. So, best thing I think we can do from my perspective is advocate for ways to bring dollars back more uniformly to the counties. Just like pre-Act 388, whenever property taxes were able to generate dollars locally based on 4% and 6% to the operating funds for school districts, we would have a much lower millage levy if we were collecting dollars under that old formula compared to the way that we are now because of the offset that happens and the way that formula works.
Okay, thank you. I have no more questions.
Mr. Duke?
I'm good. I have no questions. Thank you.
Mr. Hallison?
I was just going to say, I really appreciate the conversation around Act 388 and the disparity in the funding formula. I think that when I first realized quite how that formula worked back in 17. It really shocked me. So the more we can have conversation around that, the better. The only question I had was just generally on the revenue assumptions. Obviously, I understand the reassessment in there. Can you just touch on kind of the basis for how you, the thought process is how you laid that out for the years past the reassessment year?
So in terms of looking at the model, in terms of how we laid out the revenue growth projections.
Mm-hmm.
So really that goes back, and I hope I'm answering this as you intended, that goes back to looking at what happened in the prior reassessment. And if you think about what happened in 2020, you had per Act 388, a large portion of the properties in Charleston County were capped at that 15% growth. So their fair market value was substantially in excess of the taxable value that was established pursuant to Act 388. And, you know, in an event where we had an economic downturn, for example, back in 2008, and values were decreasing, you might expect that reassessment would kind of have an adverse effect on the overall market. But in the case of what's happened between 2020 and 2024, 2025, is you know that property values have increased substantially. And so the amount of growth that happened in 2020 is going to be realized in the next reassessment. So we heard a statistic yesterday from Planning and Real Estate. I think that in Mount Pleasant, property values over the last 4 years have increased by about 66%. So, you know that the majority of properties in Charleston County, when reappraised at that 5-year mark, are going to go up by approximately 15%, at least in the aggregate. Mm-hmm. So I took a composite of that number, you know, conservatively, and used that with the flatline millage levy to establish the revenues for 2026 fiscal year post reassessment implementation, and it's about 11% higher than the projected year-end fiscal 25 revenues.
Gotcha. And then past that, with projections in the 27 and 28, was that just a kind of CPI index, or was there any, guessing more complicated than that? But
so I used for 27 and 28 for local revenues, I used the look back averages from the last 2 years of Charleston County assessment and ATI growth. And I think those numbers rounded out to about 5.3%. So if you looked at the actual new construction placed in service and the property transfers that happened, I averaged those out and then put that in as the increase for the 2 years that followed. And then I'll continue as we look at those averages from actual budgets and audits going forward to refine those as we go into future fiscal years. Roger that. Great. And I think I looked back from 2011 to 2024 just to do the average growth rate among them, and it came out to about 5.4 if you did a year-over-year revenue projection. So it kind of fell right in there. So thank you for that. I appreciate knowing that I have somebody checking the math. Thank you. I genuinely appreciate that. That's good to hear. And I'll say too, you know, that only accounts for the local revenues. So that's, you know, some $500 million of the budget. The state revenue increases, that can be a hard one to figure out because, I mean, this year's Senate and House versions, it's just a lump sum that they've added, and then the formula allocates those dollars. So I really just look back at increases in the state budget over the last few years in terms of what they've done and how that formula allocates those dollars to CCSD. If they change that formula to our favor, that could increase dollars substantially in future years. So there's some anomalies that could happen that we don't yet know about because the legislature could go through and make a major adjustment. I think what's more guaranteed is the local property tax collections unless they change the law. But I think we all know that Act 388 probably is not going anywhere anytime soon. I agree. And is there any assumption as to any of the TIFs rolling off? Do we have any in the next 3 or 4 years, major ones? Or any credence given to that? I do have a schedule of all the TIFs. I'll have to go back and look as to when the next one rolls off. But I don't believe we have anything rolling off in the next couple of years. I didn't think so either. I just wanted to I was just came to mind. I think the TIF adjustment for fiscal 25 was $27 million. And this year's was between 18 to 22. We're still waiting to post final numbers, but we've assumed growth. If you look at those components of the different districts throughout the area, look at their growth rates and average all that together, we've rolled that into the growth so that we take that deduct out of the base budget as it's proposed. Got it. Thank you.
All right. I see you, Dr. Temple, but let me get through the rest of the committee members first and then come right back over to you. Ms. Stanton?
I'm good, thank you.
All right. Did I come to you, Mr. Duke? Oh, cool. You got any further?
I just want to go back to the fund balance reduction, slide 36. I mean, I know this is based upon what we're allocating in our budget, but there is the potential, as what happened this year, whereas we were under budget, we didn't need it. So there is the potential that while this looks pretty radical, it could flatten out and not be.
And that's why
I'm glad you're being conservative.
I think that's where my comfort with it comes from is, one frontier that we have not addressed, and it's, particularly this year with all the raises, is we have not built in vacancy factors for our experience and personnel budgets. And we know that, if we experienced with a pretty high staffing level this year, I mean, I think our vacancy level was as low as it's ever been as a percentage of the whole, that we still had $13 to $14 million in personnel savings. I haven't accounted for a vacancy factor to try to trim that up any in fiscal 25. And that's something that I'm going to need to do in fiscal 25 to continue to refine that. So you'll expect to see the expenditures, especially in personnel and benefits, underrun next year based on our experience with vacancies in fiscal 25. And I certainly think with the $7,500 increase and going to 100% of market for classified, that our vacancy rate will probably decrease even more. But I still think that, by virtue of how things work with, even if a position's vacant for, 2 months, there's going to be savings that accrue.
Go ahead, Dr. Temple.
Greetings, everyone. Well, I just wanted to say, Mr. Prentice, I appreciate all the adjustments you've been making to the budgets to make it more realistic. I never felt very good about knowing that those figures weren't really close to where they're being accurate. Now, as a proponent of the teachers, I still am very concerned about the raises that we're giving to teachers. Personally, I advocate that we really need to be at the $10,000 level. And I don't see in this budget where we've projected, what the consequences of that would be. And also with the chart that's showing, the projections for several years, what do the teacher salaries look like over those years? I mean, are they just going to be step increases, or is there the potential for next year for there to be another increase? So that's what I read the stories. I hear the stories. I know the teachers. I know that we don't have teachers who can live in my community because they can't afford the housing. And so I think we have to, while I like balancing the budget and being conservative about it, I also like being realistic to know that we have to have the staff that we need in our schools, and our teachers have to be able to live. And I also know that, over the years, we have not kept up with the rates. So while I think everybody will be happy with $7,500, I think it's still not where we still don't have the salaries where our teachers need to have them to live in the Charleston area.
So I appreciate that comment and the question. And I see Mr. Brigman came up with his video. In case you'd like to add to that, I can say financially that the model does include between $32 and $35 million in additional personnel cost in fiscal 26. And so that would account for another 3,000 plus in teacher pay increases plus steps to get us closer to $60,000 in fiscal 26 sustainably. And that's why that's the kind of the sweet spot of the 7,500 really is being able to do this year and then to step in naturally with that millage levy next year to get to what was presented as 58 plus kind of a CPI increase over what this year's 58 would realistically be. And then in 27 and 28, that would be a CPI driven. So I think I have like a 3% increase in overall personnel and benefit salaries and benefits. So it'd be that as a COLA plus a step each year going on. It wouldn't be necessarily a lump sum dollar amount. It would be more percentage driven on the increase in the market. And Mr. Brigman, on the HR component of that, you might want to speak further.
You're exactly right. It's what you and I have discussed. I think, for 2026, we'd like to hit that $60,000 mark, but a big part of this is maintaining CPI and feeling like we're at a point where our teachers need to be, and to continue monitoring that and make adjustments as needed, but not these huge amounts like $7,500 like we're doing this year. I think Dr. Temple, you make a really good point. I mean, for years and years and years, not just Charleston, but profession as a whole, districts have not paid teachers what they should be paid. And so I think we've been catching up, so to speak, over the last couple of years. And I feel really good about the 7,500 and extremely grateful that the board's considering this and talking to our compensation task force. They're very thrilled about it. So I feel like it's a really great move for the district, and I'm very excited about the 100% of market for the non-teachers. I've been since 2014 pushing the 100% of market, and the adjustment for the school-based support staff, which is not reflected in this, but I know I shared that data. We will see some upgrades as far as some of the position levels. So those employees will see an increase, not only with what the 100% market, but the step increase as well as a pay grade change. So I feel like we're in an amazing place going into 2025 for all staff. But Dr. Temple, I support the $10,000 is great. Don't get me wrong.
Well, I think we should also, know what millage what millage would we have to have in order to get to 10,000 to be able to consider it, or even if we could get it up to $800 or $8,500, just a little bit more to get us closer to the 10,000, because I just feel that our teachers do so much. And as I read one teacher's testimony yesterday, she said, when I got the raise, it meant that I could give more time to my students. I wasn't having to do extra jobs outside of the classroom. And we have to be cognizant of that our teachers are really important to our community. And if it means just a little bit more millage on the part, I'm not getting, and maybe it'll come now, but I'm not getting anyone who's pushing us to say, oh, we shouldn't raise the millage. I do get a lot of input that we need to pay our teachers more. So I'm going to continue to advocate for them, because we have time before we pass the whole budget. I don't know how other board members feel, but the emails and the conversations that that I'm privileged to hear, I know that the need is still there, and I will continue to advocate for them.
And Dr. Temple, to answer your question, each $2,500 additional increase is about 3.7 mils. And my concern with doing all of that in one fiscal year was just the sustainability element of it. You would end up increasing the millage a little bit too high, and then would have to make adjustments subsequently. So I was trying to figure out how to get us ultimately to 10,000 plus CPI on the 10,000 over a 2-year horizon, with the most conservative millage increase required, with something that we could sustain. So that was kind of where the 7,500 came from, in consideration of what we have in our bank, what we would need to do, where we would hit a sustainable stride and not have to increase or decrease the millage further in the future. So that model I just pulled up while you were talking includes at least $3,000 in fiscal 26, which would get you over the 10,000 between the 2 years, plus the step. So there's opportunity there, and you certainly could legally do more millage in 1 year, but it wouldn't be as sustainable as doing the implementation over 2 in terms of minimizing the increase in the millage impact.
Thank you. For my question, I'm gonna run back to WSF, because I know it came up at the board meeting a couple of weeks ago. Where did we fall at with how the program schools will get their funding?
So in regards to the WSF, pardon me, I'm sorry, I had to step away for a second. For this fiscal year, we're not recommending any changes to program schools, the Centers for Advanced Studies, Liberty Hill, Daniel Jenkins, and Clark, because of the nature at which those schools are already funded. You'll see back on slide way up, in some of the extra items that we budgeted for, some of the schools, that Wynwood Farms and some other special programs were included. But again, the per pupil expenditure at our program schools is significantly higher than how we fund our neighborhood schools. And so we believe that they are resourced appropriately. And as we've attempted to meet with them one-on-one, we've attempted to meet their needs. And Dr. Epp and Dr. Williams are continuing those meetings now, based on what students need in those environments. So for the FY25 year, fiscal year, we are not recommending any WSF changes in regards to program schools.
Okay, so when a student is moved to one of those program schools, would their home school still have their allocation for them? So say if I have a student at West Ashley who's sent over to Daniel Jenkins, would they still have that allocation for that student that's at West Ashley, or would it just go away?
It will, because those students remain enrolled in their base school, right? Although they're served at a program site, they may remain enrolled for the state's purposes in their base school. And because those per pupil expenditures are already significantly higher, Mr. Prentice and I took a look at that last week. We just did not think it fiscally sound in this FY25 budget to do anything differently. Now, next year, we might have a different recommendation, but again, the per pupil expenditure in programs is significantly higher than the neighborhood schools. Mr. Prentice?
Yeah, we did some initial analysis on what it would look like if we created like a standard allocation formula for the program schools, and it wasn't consistently impactful. So that was why when you look at that slide that has the standard allocations built in, there's a lot of those that impact the program schools that were ESSER funded positions and things like that we just added to their standard allocation subject to a future review, so that over the course of fiscal 25, we could look at a more detailed formula that could be implemented to consistently impact all of those schools. It was all across the board in terms of the pupils enrolled at each school and the number of teachers at each school, and what was currently there. So it just needed a further level of review. But like I think several of was it 20 positions
Yes.
in the standard allocation template.
Yes.
Several of those positions impacted the program schools, and the cost of those positions, or the points that originated from those positions, were in excess of what they would have actually received under like a standard allocation formula.
Significantly, yes.
I'll come back to that at the board. Because what I'm trying to understand is, like, say, like the example I just brought up, the student is not in the school. Say if they're at Daniel Jenkins, they have to level their way out. If they go in, then hopefully this never happens. But I've seen it happen once or twice. Somebody goes in 9th grade, very long time.
Yeah.
So that allocation is still there at West Ashley, even though it's not actually servicing that student at West Ashley, and they can't even get that service at Daniel Jenkins.
Right, but we have to. You're exactly right. However, remember, it takes it's a 6-to-1 for high schools specifically, since that's the example you use. It's a 6-to-1 ratio, so it takes 6 pupils in poverty at West Ashley High School to add 1 additional student to the base enrollment. So technically you're right, but I hate to say it's a fraction of a student, but when it comes down to it, it's, you know, a 6-to-1 for high schools, 4-to-1 in middle schools, and 3-to-1 in elementary schools. Oh, it's not ideal, I understand, but fiscally, in taking a look at how we are already funding our program schools, we didn't believe it prudent to apply the WSF per se because of the transient nature of many of the program schools.
Mhm. And will we get the breakdown of each school on Monday for like the pupils in poverty, multilingual learners?
We can share that in the board brief. I think we just actually shared it as, I believe it's already prepared. We can do that. And it might be helpful for us also to share with you the per pupil cost of program schools in the board brief so that you understand the significant
Spreadsheet we put together, yeah.
the significant expenditures of program schools based on the number of enrollees, the number of students versus the number of staff already in position.
Yeah, any further questions on the budget 25? All right, so we're gonna go into executive session. Get a motion to go into
We
executive
need a
session.
recommendation for.
Go ahead.
I say, does the committee wish to make a recommendation at this point in time to take formal action? I know we're not technically in that section of the agenda, but nothing to say that you couldn't do that at this point since you've had your public comment.
Yeah, I was about to say we had to put on that information. Okay. You want recommendation?
Sure.
By all means. What's that?
So it would, the motion would be to make the recommendation as presented by staff on the 2025 budget to the board for consideration of a first reading.
Second. We have a motion and we have a second. Any further questions or conversation? No, hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
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 Gotcha, Ms. Stanton. The ayes have it, and so we'll go ahead and move that forward and push that recommendation forward. All right. Executive session.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Can I get a motion to go into open session?
So moved.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right. Board a motion to submit to recommend to the board to fill the two vacancies that we will recommend to the board would be for Lori Carter and Jennifer Burbidge. Do we want to make that motion?
Yep. So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Our next audit and finance meeting will be June 4th. And we will in between. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate the large crowd. Can we get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Let's go. Yeah, now adjourn.